The polished tips of Colonel David Carter's shoes tapped across the tile floor like a steady drumbeat in a symphony of chaos. The airport swelled with bodies and noise, parents tugging kids through security, businessmen hunched over laptops, teenagers with earbuds lost in worlds of their own. But Carter walked as if time bent around him, upright, composed, the bars on his chest gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Today, his uniform carried more than ceremony. It carried the weight of silence, a silence that draped itself over the coffin resting in the belly of a transport vehicle outside, wrapped in stars and stripes. Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21. No family left to receive him. No one but Carter, who had promised long ago that no one would come home alone. And he meant to keep it. He approached the airline counter with calm precision, laying down his military papers with the dignity of someone who had stood on the edge of war and never flinched. The woman behind the desk barely glanced up. Her nails clacked against the keyboard, eyes flickering, then pausing. Something shifted in her expression, a tight line at the mouth, a nervous blink. She glanced sideways at her co-worker, then back to Carter. "Sir," her voice wavered, just slightly. "Can I see that again?" He handed over the documents without hesitation, his face unmoving. Her fingers hovered, then typed again. A whisper passed between her and another employee. The air cooled. Carter had seen that look before, not in battlefields, but in boardrooms, hotel lobbies, car dealerships. A look that didn't ask who you were, just what you looked like. When she turned back, the smile she wore was a performance. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be an issue with your reservation." He straightened slightly. "This is a military escort. My orders are clear." She didn't meet his eyes. "Yes, but there's a security policy. We can't override it." Security policy. Carter said nothing, just studied her. A flick of the eyes. A twitch of the neck. She was buying time. And behind her, a man in a blue lanyard leaned in, whispered, then backed away as if the uniform might burn him. Behind Carter, the line grew. Murmurs began to ripple. "Sir," she repeated, voice taut, "I need to ask you to step aside." He didn't. The silence he held wasn't loud, but it was heavy. His presence forced the attention of strangers nearby. Phones came out, at first discreetly, then openly. "Ma'am," Carter said, his tone like stone wrapped in velvet. "I'm escorting a fallen soldier. I am not stepping aside." She faltered. A supervisor emerged, older, tired-looking, the kind of man who had spent 20 years dodging blame. "Colonel," he said, lips tight, "we're just following protocol." "Which protocol is that?" Carter asked. "Be specific." "Just policy." Another murmur in the crowd. A teenage boy leaned forward, whispering to his mother. A woman in a red scarf looked from Carter to the counter staff, her face hardening. Then came a voice from behind, gravelly, measured. "You denying him based on clearance or color?" All heads turned. A man in a worn USMC cap stepped forward, eyes sharp beneath his brow. He looked like he'd walked out of history, wrinkles cut by discipline, hands like oak. The supervisor flinched. "No, sir, we're not. This isn't about clearance." The veteran crossed his arms. It damn well better not be. Now the eyes weren't just watching. They were witnessing. The tension turned electric. A young woman near the front turned on her phone camera, lips pressed in disbelief. She spoke into her live stream quietly. "They're denying a decorated Army colonel. You seeing this?" And that's when the shift happened. When passengers stopped being passengers and became participants. A chorus of phones lit the terminal. Whispers turned into questions. "Why won't they let him board? He's escorting a body, right? Is this real?" The counter agents shrank. The supervisor stepped back. The system, which had been built to withstand complaints, couldn't withstand the collective gaze of a room full of strangers refusing to look away. Still, Carter didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten or plead. His stillness made more noise than a riot could. The woman behind the desk looked up again, pale now. She typed, paused, typed again, then disappeared through a door labeled staff only. Time stretched. Then, like a wire snapping, the loudspeaker cut through the air. Attention passengers. Flight 237 to Phoenix is delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience. No one groaned. No one moved. Because the delay wasn't mechanical. It was human. A tweet popped. Then another. A trending hashtag was born in real time. Hashtag let him fly. The Marine vet from earlier walked up beside Carter, whispering, "You're not alone, brother. Not today." Then came the man in the suit, not airline blue, but government gray. Crisp, deliberate steps. Eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. He didn't introduce himself with pleasantries. He nodded at Carter, then spoke to the staff. This man is not boarding commercial. He is being escorted to a military transport. Right now. The supervisor blinked. "But we had the situation under control." "No," said the man. "You had it under wraps. Now you have a crisis." He turned to Carter. "Sir, if you would come with me." Carter tipped his head toward the Marine. "Thank you." The Marine just nodded. "We look out for our own." As Carter walked away, the cameras followed. So did the eyes. But he didn't walk toward a gate. He walked toward something heavier, toward a coffin draped in red, white, and blue, and a promise kept. But for the airline, the reckoning had just begun. The backlash rolled like thunder. Headlines ran on every major network. Advocacy groups issued statements. Politicians demanded answers. Shares dropped. And beneath all that noise, one image remained. A soldier in uniform, standing alone, carrying the silence of a fallen comrade, refused a seat until the world forced the door open. Yet the story wasn't over. Because a week later, a whistleblower emerged. A former employee who had seen the internal messages. The delay wasn't a system error. It was something worse. Something coded in prejudice, hidden behind policy, and exposed by a camera. And just as that fire seemed to burn out, a video leaked, footage from a back-office security cam. A supervisor whispering, laughing, pointing at Carter's picture. The real war was just beginning. The footage didn't just leak. It exploded, shared across military forums, veteran networks, national news, and civilian platforms alike. And the man in the grainy video, the one smirking while pointing at Carter's profile photo on the screen, wasn't some anonymous junior staffer. He was the regional operations manager for the airline's Southwest Division. His name? Dennis Calder. And by Monday morning, his name was on every trending topic in the country. Inside a D.C. press room, a podium bore the seal of the Department of Defense. Cameras clicked. Reporters elbowed for position. Major Thomas Beckett, the man who had intercepted Carter at the airport, stepped into the frame and spoke without blinking. This department stands by every man and woman in uniform. What occurred at Logan International last Friday does not reflect the values of our nation, nor will it go unchallenged. Behind the scenes, Colonel Carter sat in a windowless office lined with flags and silence. He hadn't asked for the spotlight. He didn't want it. But the mission hadn't ended when he handed off Jason Reynolds' body to the family. The mission had changed. That night, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Colonel Carter? My name is Aisha Monroe. I'm with the Civil Rights Accountability Bureau. We believe this incident is part of a larger pattern. We'd like to meet." He met her the next morning. Aisha was sharp-eyed, with a voice like gravel rubbed through silk. She laid out folders on the table. Photos, memos, incident reports. There had been others. Not military escorts, but veterans. People of color. Subtle denials. Mistaken identities. Rebookings without explanation. Carter looked at the faces in those folders and realized the truth. Jason Reynolds wasn't the only one without a voice. And Carter's silence wouldn't protect him. Later that week, subpoenas landed at the airline's legal department. A congressional hearing was called, and Carter, stoic, decorated, silent for so long, was asked to testify. As he stood before the panel, cameras flashing, microphones angled toward him, he took a breath. I was not denied a flight. I was denied recognition. Recognition of service. Recognition of dignity. And recognition of the man I was there to bring home. But just as momentum began to swing toward change, the threat started. Unmarked letters, hang-up calls, a car that followed his for 2 miles before veering off. Then one night a break-in. His apartment door cracked at the frame. Nothing stolen. Just his military folder opened and left on the kitchen table. His uniform coat draped over a chair, as if someone wanted him to know they'd touched it. Carter didn't flinch, but the lines around his eyes deepened, because someone out there didn't want the truth getting louder. And buried inside Aisha Monroe's files was one more name, one more case. An Air Force captain, denied boarding at the same airport. But unlike Carter, he never made it to the media, because 2 months after his denial, he was found dead, ruled a suicide, but the details never added up. And Carter had just found the last call the captain ever made. It was to the same airline, the same supervisor, the same man in the security footage. Dennis Calder. This wasn't about one denial. This was a pattern, and patterns hide systems. Colonel Carter stood up, his fists unclenching slowly, because now he wasn't just escorting the dead. He was carrying the living with him, and somebody was about to answer for all of it. 2 days later, Carter stood at the edge of a chain-link fence on the outskirts of Arlington County. Wind swept through the winter-bare trees, stirring the edges of his coat. Before him loomed the site of an abandoned airline maintenance facility, quiet now, gutted by time, but once alive with the heartbeat of ground operations. It was also where the now-exiled regional manager Dennis Calder once held closed-door meetings. No surveillance, no paper trail, no transparency. Aisha Monroe stood beside him, a manila folder clutched to her chest, her brow furrowed beneath her beanie. "This place doesn't show up on any active logs," she murmured. "It's where they trained certain mid-tier managers on. Internal discretion. It was supposed to be decommissioned 3 years ago." Carter said nothing, but the way his jaw tense said everything. He pushed open the squealing gate, and together they stepped into the hollow shell of what had once passed for corporate progress. Inside, the air was stale. A bulb flickered overhead. Discarded manuals littered the floor. But behind a rusting locker, Aisha found what she was looking for. A hard plastic case marked property of Cassidian HROPS. Internal only. She flipped the locks open. Files. Tapes. Transcripts. Carter knelt beside her, reading over her shoulder. His eyes locked on one name. Captain Avery LaRue. The Air Force captain. The one who had been found dead. Inside the file, a redacted transcript of an internal call. The words blurred with censor lines, but one phrase punched through clearly. "He's not a priority." Carter's hand gripped the folder tighter. Aisha glanced up at him. "There's more." Calder's emails. They scrubbed most of the contents, but a few headers survived. "Look at the CC list." Carter stared. Several names, including one that made his breath catch. Senator Harold Brandt, chair of the Transportation Oversight Committee, the same man who had publicly praised Carter after the incident went viral, the same man who had offered to personally follow up with airline executives. Carter stood slowly. The room seemed to shift. "We need to be careful," Aisha said, her voice low now. "This isn't about a bad manager anymore. This is a tree that goes all the way up, and every branch has sharp teeth." But Carter had seen worse than teeth. He had walked through war zones, stared down enemies who didn't blink. What haunted him now wasn't fear. It was how easily this could have stayed hidden. They copied the files, and they left. That night, Carter received an anonymous message. No text, just a photo. His apartment window, taken from the street. The timestamp, 2 minutes ago. He didn't call the police. He didn't panic. He packed. By morning, he was already in Baltimore, checking into a quiet corner motel under a different name. Aisha joined him later with 2 laptops and a burner phone. Together, they uploaded the files, anonymously, into the hands of a trusted journalist, a veteran herself, someone who'd spent her career peeling back polished lies. 3 days later, a story broke across multiple networks. Pattern of discrimination and cover-up in airline government nexus exposed. The story exploded. Files, leaked emails, internal training footage, faces, names, a full exposé wrapped in Carter's voice. The airline issued a statement, shocked, regretful, promising reform. But it was too late. Senator Brandt denied knowledge, claimed his name was added in error. Congress called for a full investigation. Veterans groups staged walkouts at terminals across the country. And Carter? He didn't stop, because buried in those files was one more case. A woman, Sergeant Lena Miles, denied service, then blacklisted. She was alive, and she had receipts. He and Aisha tracked her down. She'd been living off-grid in Arizona, burned out, disillusioned. But when she opened the door and saw Carter in uniform, she straightened. "You came." He nodded. "And now, so will the truth." But that night, someone else came too. A car rolled slow down the desert road. No headlights. A glint of something metal in the passenger seat. A camera in Carter's rented SUV caught it all. And what it captured changed everything. Because the man in the passenger seat was Dennis Calder. He hadn't gone into hiding. He was hunting. And now the war wasn't just political. It was personal. The Arizona sky was pitch black. No stars. No wind. Just silence thick enough to choke on. Inside the small desert cabin, Carter paced near the window, eyes locked on the dust-covered road. Aisha stood behind him, her fingers dancing across a laptop keyboard, syncing the security footage to the cloud. Every few seconds, she glanced at the paused frame of Calder's face, blurred by headlights but unmistakable. "He's not just watching," she whispered. "He's closing in." Outside, the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Carter stiffened. Aisha froze. They both reached for the drawer under the kitchenette. Inside, a military-issue Glock. Carter didn't say a word. He tucked it against his side and nodded toward the back hallway. Lena. She was already there, dragging an old footlocker across the floor, revealing a hidden crawl space beneath. The woman may have been burned out, but she hadn't lost her instincts. "You two go," she said. "I'll stall." Carter hesitated, eyes narrowing. "No, we move together." But the moment shattered. A crash of glass in the front. Then silence again, followed by a voice. Low, measured, tainted with cruelty. "Colonel, it didn't have to go this way." Carter motioned silently, and they all dropped to a crouch. The laptop screen flickered in the background as Aisha pulled out a flash drive. She stuffed it into her bag, zipped it shut, and mouthed, "Back exit." The next few moments blurred. They slipped out through the rear, an old service door half covered in cactus roots. The heat still clung to the air even after midnight, but Carter's focus was ice. They didn't run. They stalked through the desert brush like ghosts, retracing the shadows until they reached the ridge above Lena's trailer. From there, they saw him, Calder, standing in the broken frame of the front window, gun at his side, not raised, not aiming, just waiting. And then he spoke again. "This is bigger than you think. Turn around now, and it all goes away." Carter stared down at him from the ridge and whispered, "He doesn't know we're above him." Lena, breath shaking but steady, whispered, "I've got a shot. You give the word." "No," Carter said. "We expose him, not end him." They slipped back into the shadows. By dawn, they were already in New Mexico. A contact of Aisha's had set up a safe house just outside. Santa Fe. No cell signal. No internet. Just a shortwave radio and silence. For the next 24 hours, they organized. Evidence. Audio clips. Flight logs. HR records. And one final file. A shell company. Registered in Panama. Tied to both the airline's discretionary training programs and Senator Brandt's campaign fund. "This is it," Aisha said. "This links everything. Calder, Brandt, the airline, they've been using these denials to weed people out. Veterans, whistleblowers, anyone too visible." Carter sat down, staring at the board of connections they'd pinned to the wall. "What do we do with it?" Lena asked. Carter looked up. "We go public. Not just news. Senate floor." Aisha's eyes widened. "You want to testify again?" "Not want. Need." But even as they planned to reveal, word spread. The journalist, who had published the first story, her apartment was broken into. Files gone. Laptop smashed. One of the veterans who organized the walkouts, injured in a hit and run. And back in D.C., Senator Brandt issued a chilling statement. "These baseless accusations are dangerous to national security." Carter's hands balled into fists. "They're scared," Aisha said. "No," Carter replied. "They're cornered. There's a difference. That night, Carter received a package. No return address. Inside a phone. It rang the moment he opened the box. He answered. Calder's voice came through. You've got 3 days to disappear. Or I make the Reynolds file public. The full version. Carter froze. His pulse spiked. The Reynolds file. Jason Reynolds. The fallen soldier he had escorted. There was more? What are you talking about? Carter growled. I'm talking about what really happened in Afghanistan. You buried it. But I didn't. You go public, I go nuclear. Click. The line went dead. Carter sat down. Silent. Aisha stared at him. What did he mean? He didn't answer. Lena leaned forward. David, what is the Reynolds file? Carter's shoulders slumped. And for the first time in the entire battle, he looked tired. Because some ghosts don't stay buried. And Calder had just unearthed one. Silence lingered in the safe house, like a shadow that refused to move. The only sound was the soft hum of an old desk fan rattling slightly as it oscillated. Carter sat in a wooden chair near the window, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. Aisha stood against the far wall, arms folded, eyes narrowing at him through the dim light. Lena sat nearby, not pressing, not prodding, just waiting. Finally, Carter spoke. Afghanistan. Kandahar. 2014. His voice was flat. Sandpaper dragged across steel. We were on recon, Jason and I, a young kid. Smart. Green, but steady. We intercepted chatter about a rogue asset running operations through civilian corridors, dirty work. Black contracts, unsanctioned. I logged it. Reported it. He looked up. His eyes didn't blink. Command told me to erase it. Said it was internal. Not my jurisdiction. Aisha swallowed. And you? I followed orders. He paused. Until Jason didn't. Lena leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. What did he do? He recorded it. Names, dates, locations. Sent it to a private server. Carter exhaled slowly. A week later, his Humvee detonated. They ruled it an IED. But I knew better. Aisha's voice trembled. You think they silenced him? No, Carter said. I know they did. Silence again. This time heavier. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't save that footage. But Calder, he was there. Not military. Contractor. He knew Jason had the file. He must have taken it. And now he's using it. Aisha stepped back, processing it all. So Calder's not just a corporate goon. He's a cleanup man. Carter stood. And Jason wasn't just a casualty. He was a threat. Lena looked between them. Then the Reynolds file. Is evidence of a government-sanctioned execution. They stood in silence. 3 people tangled in a web spun far above their pay grades. The next morning, a plan was in motion. Aisha's journalist contact had gone dark, disconnected lines, bounced emails. So they contacted a new source, Julian Grant, former NSA analyst turned whistleblower. He was paranoid, unpredictable, but trustworthy. They met him in an abandoned library outside Durango. Julian arrived with a duffel bag full of gear and eyes that hadn't slept in days. You have no idea how deep this goes, he said without greeting. Brant Calder, a group called Doyen Group. Private intelligence contractors. They've been intercepting vet files, rerouting assignments, blacklisting anyone too outspoken. And Jason, he cracked their network. He set down a hard drive. This is what Jason found. Carter stared at the object like it was haunted. Julian opened the screen, punched in a key code, and there it was. Video footage, reports, audio. One video began to play. A young Jason Reynolds in dusty fatigues, speaking into a camera. They told us to stand down. But I can't. Not when civilians are being used. Not when our own are being sold out. If I disappear, tell my family I didn't go quietly. Carter's chest rose and fell. Aisha whispered. He knew. Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard. We drop this now. It goes viral. But Calder will move fast. He'll try to suppress it before it sticks. Carter stepped forward. Then we don't just drop it. We flood them. Every channel. Every file. All at once. Julian nodded. You'll be on every list. No more hiding. Carter didn't hesitate. I haven't been hiding. I've been waiting. 2 hours later, the upload began. Secure servers, civilian watchdogs, military Reddit boards, news outlets, everything. The Reynolds file, the training documents, the shell companies, names, faces, dates, and one headline exploded like a grenade across the country. Dead soldiers video exposes deep state cover-up. But just as the world watched with open mouths and clenched fists, another video surfaced. One no one had seen before. A CCTV clip. The night before Jason's death. Carter, Jason, and Calder in the same room, arguing. Jason shouting. Carter trying to stop him. And Calder silent, arms folded, smiling. No sound, just images. And a final frame. Jason storming out. Carter's hand grabbing his shoulder, and then letting go. Julian turned to Carter. What is this? Carter's face went pale. I never saw this footage. He backed up a step. Aisha stepped between him and the screen. David, what are you telling us? Carter didn't speak, because buried in that final frame was something he had hoped to forget. Jason's words before he walked into death. You either stand with me, or get out of my way. And Carter had stepped aside. The storm that followed was not just political, it was personal. And it wasn't just Carter under the lens now. It was everyone connected to the cover-up. The CCTV footage aired on primetime news. Social media turned Carter into a villain and a hero in the same breath. Some called him a coward. Others, a man forced into an impossible choice. The narrative fractured. Aisha watched the frenzy unfold from the motel room TV. Lips pressed into a thin line. Lena sat beside her, arms crossed. Carter stood in the corner, staring out the window, his silhouette cast long and sharp by the setting sun. Do you regret it? Aisha finally asked. Carter didn't answer, because regret didn't matter now. Only what came next. That night, a message arrived. Encrypted. No signature. But the subject line chilled Carter's blood. You let him die. Now prove it wasn't for nothing. Attached GPS coordinates. A time. 1 hour from now. No explanation. No threat. Carter looked at Aisha. Stay here. Both of you. We're not splitting up. She snapped. This isn't a debate. He grabbed his coat, tucked the Glock into the waistband, and walked out. The coordinates led to an old rail yard. Rusted tracks, broken fences, graffiti-covered freight cars frozen in place. Carter parked, stepped out, and walked alone into the heart of the darkened yard. And there, under a gutted rail tower, stood Dennis Calder. Same slick coat, same calm smile. You came, Calder said. Carter stopped 10 feet away. I always do. You went too far, Colonel. You made this public, brought civilians into it. You made it personal when you touched Reynolds. Calder chuckled, stepping closer. Jason was reckless. You knew it. You tried to stop him. And now what? Calder asked, tilting his head. You gonna shoot me? Here, after all your moral speeches. No, Carter said. You're going to walk into the light. Spotlights flared on from the surrounding boxcars. Federal agents, armed, silent. Aisha stepped forward, recorder in hand. Lena behind her. Julian flanked by 2 officials in plain suits. Calder's smirk fell. You were always the decoy, Carter said. We weren't just exposing the system. We were isolating its infection. Calder backed away slowly. You think this end with me? You think Brandt Doyen Group, the black contracts, all of them go away because you recorded me? No, Aisha said, stepping forward. But it starts with you. They cuffed him, but he laughed, even as they led him away, because Calder knew something. And later that night, they learned what it was. Back at the motel, Julian decrypted one final file from Jason's drive. It was a kill list. Dozens of names. All military. All flagged. All marked as uncooperative. Some had already died. Accidents. Suicides. Disappearances. One name, near the bottom, had a fresh timestamp. David Carter. Julian looked up. They knew you'd talk eventually. And just as the words left his mouth, the power went out. Outside, tires screeched. A black SUV rolled to a stop. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. And someone shouted, "Contact!" Gunfire. Glass shattered. Lena grabbed the drive. Aisha dove for the floor. Carter stood tall and returned fire. The first bullet cracked through the window like a thunderclap, splintering the night into chaos. Carter dropped to one knee behind the overturned motel dresser, returning fire through the blind. Two muzzle flashes lit the lot outside. A second round punctured the frame inches from Aisha's head. She stayed low, crawling toward the laptop and yanking the power cord free. "We can't let them get the drive," she yelled. Lena, crouched by the bathroom door, stuffed the flash drive into her boot. Her breathing was fast but controlled. "I'll draw them left. You two head out the back." "Negative," Carter barked. "We move together." But the attackers weren't amateurs. Another window shattered. Tear gas hissed into the room. "Move." Carter tossed a chair through the rear bathroom window and climbed through first, glass shredding his sleeves. Aisha followed, coughing, tears streaking her face. Lena hit the ground last, and they sprinted into the scrub brush beyond the motel's back lot. Three figures in tactical gear burst into the room behind them. Too late. An hour later, the trio regrouped inside a dark drainage tunnel beneath an abandoned parkway overpass. Cold water ran ankle-deep. The only light came from Aisha's phone screen. Julian was gone. They'd lost contact with him as the shooting began. Whether he was alive or not, they didn't know. Carter sat against the tunnel wall, pressing gauze to a gash in his arm. "This isn't retaliation. It's a cleanup operation." Lena nodded grimly. "And they're not stopping until we're all ghosts." Aisha wiped her eyes. "We need leverage. Something they can't erase. Something they can't silence." Carter reached into his pocket, pulled out a small plastic ID card. "DoD clearance. The Doyen Group has a central server," he said. "It's black site secure. But I was there once. With Jason." Lena stared. "You think the master copy's still there?" "If Jason uploaded what I think he did, it's in that archive." Aisha's voice was flat. "Then we go get it." The next day, they arrived in rural Virginia, where the private airfield Jason once mentioned in his notes sat beneath layers of red tape and razor wire. Carter changed into an old uniform. Lena disguised herself as security. Aisha hacked the access panel to the perimeter gate. Every second past the fence felt like a countdown. Inside the main hangar, they found the door, level 3 access only. Behind it, a vault. Steel, fingerprint-coded, retinal scan-locked. Aisha stepped up. Jason's scan might still be in the system. Try his ID number. Carter typed it in from memory. A soft beep. Green light. The door slid open. Inside, silence. Rows of black servers, each humming faintly. In the far corner, a single access terminal. Lena kept watch at the entrance while Carter and Aisha approached. Aisha inserted the flash drive. Her fingers flew. Files populated the screen. Thousands. "Holy hell," she whispered. "This is everything. Missions, audits, covert ops." Then she froze. "David, there's a file here. Timestamped today. Labeled. Final clearance, Carter." He leaned in. "Read the lines." The content wasn't just operational, it was personal. Details about his family. Locations. Daily patterns. Surveillance logs going back years. "Jesus," he muttered. "They've been tracking me since before Reynolds." Aisha looked up, voice shaking. "You were never a threat to them. You were the blueprint." Behind them, the airlock hissed. Lena shouted, "Incoming!" Gunfire ripped through the room. Sparks burst from the terminal. Aisha screamed. Carter spun, firing blindly. One assailant dropped. Another ducked behind a pillar. Lena tackled Aisha, dragging her to cover. Carter laid down suppressive fire, then reached for the flash drive. Gone. Smoke filled the air. He turned. The drive, embedded in the terminal. Damaged. A faint whir. A second self-destruct protocol initiated. A countdown blinked on the screen. 00:58. 00:57. 056. "We have to go." Lena shouted. Carter stared at the terminal, then the ceiling. He pulled open a maintenance hatch. Up here. They climbed, fussed, crawling through ducts that groaned under pressure. Below them, fire consumed the archive. As they burst out onto the rooftop, the final explosion rocked the complex. Flames rose. Smoke curled into the blue morning sky. Carter looked down at his shaking hands. Everything was gone, except one file. Aisha clutched it tight to her chest, recovered just seconds before the breach. It was labeled, Project Night Whistler. They had no idea what it meant, but it was the reason Jason died, and it was the last thread left. The file was encrypted, deep, layered military grade. Not something you could crack with a laptop and an internet connection. They needed power. They needed time. But above all, they needed a place no one was watching. They found it in a retired military comm station buried beneath the forest outside Quantico. Carter had pulled a favor. One last favor. An old comrade owed him silence, and a generator that still hummed in the dark. Inside, they sealed the blast door and powered up the core terminal. Aisha worked in silence, her brow furrowed as she typed. Lena stood watch by the steel entrance, rifle cradled. Carter sat across from the screen, the glow reflecting in his eyes. First layer's biometric, Aisha muttered. It wants a retinal scan. Carter leaned in. The scanner beeped, then turned green. Second layer, voice authorization. Looks like Jason hard-coded this one. She tapped a key. The screen lit up with a waveform prompt. Carter hesitated. Then he said, Colonel David Carter, accessing file Night Whistler. A pause. Then, access granted. The file unfolded slowly. Not a report. Not a video. A program. Tens of thousands of lines of code. Geo-coordinates. Time logs. Profiles. This is predictive modeling, Aisha whispered. Military AI surveillance. Real-time psychological warfare projection. Carter squinted at the screen. Explain. They were tracking soldier behavior, tracking stress markers, voice inflection, decision-making patterns, trying to forecast dissent, not after it happens, before. Lena turned. They were profiling who might blow the whistle. Aisha nodded. Jason found it. That's what got him killed. She clicked another file, a flowchart. At the top, Dorian Group Behavioral Intelligence. Underneath, a series of branches. Command, Corporate, Legislative. At the bottom, highlighted in red, targets flagged for termination. Carter's name was first. Jason's had already been grayed out. And below Carter's? Aisha Monroe, Lena Miles, Julian Grant. A long pause fell over the room. Lena broke it. This isn't a kill list. It's a future list. They're not silencing threats, Carter said quietly. They're deleting outcomes. Aisha's hands trembled slightly as she copied the data. This is what we needed, she said. This is how we bring them down. Not just Calder, not just Brandt, the whole tree. But before she could finish the transfer, the screen flashed. Remote breach detected.